Hello everyone, I am Jeden Tolentino and I am an MA student in the History Graduate Program at York University. Today I'll be sharing with you my research on The View from Above in the Hollywood films of Denis Villeneuve. I am physically in Winnipeg at the moment and I acknowledge that I am on ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory. These lands are the heartland of the Métis people. In a 2015 interview, the Canadian filmmaker Denis Villeneuve said that while he missed the French language when working on American films, he did not necessarily feel exiled from his native Quebec. Villeneuve's critical acclaim in the United States in the latter half of the 2010s validates his equivocation. Having already directed two American productions that the National Board of Review had afterwards recognized, Villeneuve was at work on Arrival at the time of the interview. The film would net Villeneuve an Academy Award nomination for Best Director. Villeneuve has since added Blade Runner 2049 to his Hollywood filmography and was named Filmmaker of the Decade in December 2019 by the Hollywood Critics Association. Be that as it may, the same equivocation is an invitation to study Villeneuve's work in the U.S. as the oeuvre of a filmmaker in exile. I accepted this invitation and will show here that Villeneuve's Hollywood filmography can be read as a projection of his own exile onto the characters in his American films. In particular, I analyzed how Villeneuve has used the view from above to express the crossing of both geographic and symbolic borders into both physical and figurative exile. I focused on the main character of each of Villeneuve's three Hollywood films that were released over 3 calendar years, that is, Sicario in 2015, Arrival in 2016, and Blade Runner 2049 in 2017. Aside from portraying an apparent spatial dimension, these films follow a temporal meta-pattern. Sicario is set in contemporary times and tackles the dynamics of the US-Mexico border. By contrast, the two films that came after Sicario are overtly futuristic. Arrival shows humankind's first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence in some near-future Earth that is still ecologically recognizable. Blade Runner 2049, however, goes even further into the future to show an Earth that has suffered ecological collapse. This progression offered the opportunity to ask how Villeneuve's view from above has evolved. Over 2 extended sequences in Sicario, Villeneuve told the story of Kate Macer, played by Emily Blunt, and her symbolic crossing from the legitimate to the illegitimate use of delegated power. Both sequences begin and end with Kate in a physically elevated, though never politically strong position. The middle portion of these sequences, by contrast, puts Kate's crossings from the US to Mexico and back under the view from above of Villeneuve. While remaining in a relatively confined geographical space throughout the film, Kate finds herself exiled further and further towards illegitimacy. The first of the 2 extended sequences begins with Kate volunteering to join a CIA-led interagency task force. Kate is going into professional exile, officially from the FBI, and in due course into the middle of a conflict between drug cartels in Mexico and Colombia. The first leg of this exile is a private jet ride that crosses borders between Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Villeneuve showed from above the Chihuahuan Desert that traverses these 3 states. At this point in the film, Kate is still above not just US territory, but also any semblance of illegality. However, from the moment that Villeneuve put Kate in an SUV for the trip from El Paso to Ciudad Juarez and back, she is underneath not just the view from above, but also a cloud of illegitimacy. Villeneuve viewed most of the border crossing into and out of Mexico with helicopter shots, but in the midst of this is a view that peers just over a barbed wire fence of Kate's convoy entering a compound from which the task force extracts a cartel informant. Once back in U.S. soil, Kate ineffectually protests over the illegality of the operation. The sequence ends with her helplessly standing on the roof of a building looking over the frontier with binoculars onto a firefight between cartels. The second extended sequence echoes the first while amplifying Kate's sensation of exile. Kate sees from above at the beginning and at the end of the sequence, but remains beneath the view from above during the crossing into Mexico and back, this time via a tunnel used by cartels. In the briefing for what Kate would eventually find out to be not just another extraction of an informant, she views a satellite image of the location of the tunnel from a computer screen. Villeneuve replicated Kate's view from an aerial infrared image that shows the operation, moving in darkness towards the tunnel. Kate discovers that they were in fact inserting a sicario into Mexico. She attempts to arrest the sicario, who in turn knocks her down with a perfectly placed bullet. Villeneuve frames the scene with the sicario standing over a stunned Kate, pointing a pistol at her and telling her to get back through the tunnel. At the end of the film, Kate, clearly traumatized, encounters the sicario again. He coerces her to sign a document attesting to the legality of the actions of the interagency task force. The sicario then suggests that Kate go on another exile, saying, "You are not a wolf, and this is a land of wolves now." Villeneuve frames the end of the encounter with Kate on her balcony looking over the sicario. This time, she is the one pointing the gun at him, but unlike him, she does not shoot. Women in the cinema of the 2010s, aside from Kate, have been exiled to a paramilitary endeavor, and their respective physical and symbolic crossings of borders have been similarly viewed from above. One of these women appears in the second of Villeneuve's border texts. In Arrival, Louise Banks, played by Amy Adams, goes on professional exile from academia to a military-led scientific mission. Villeneuve followed the pattern that he had employed in Sicario by giving Louise the view from above at the beginning and at the end of the mission, but placing her underneath the gaze of extraterrestrials while she makes incremental crossings. On a Black Hawk ride towards the extraterrestrial landing site in Montana, Louise views a clear border between the area around which the U.S. military has thrown a cordon and the mass of people with their vehicles wanting to gaze at the extraterrestrial ship. The towering nature of the ship limited Villeneuve's viewing options from above, except when Louise enters the ship from below. A gravitational anomaly within the ship allows Louise to approach the transparent barrier that sequesters the extraterrestrial heptapods as if she were walking on a wall. Villeneuve presented this disorientation by showing Louise and her team as if they were walking on a ceiling. Eventually, Louise is face to face with heptapods across a transparent barrier, but Villeneuve technically framed her from above relative to the orientation of the Earth's surface. This separates the views from above in Arrival from the more natural ones in Sicario. Louise's symbolic crossing is also different. Whereas Kate crossed the border between the legitimate and the illegitimate, Louise escapes a temporal existence tied to the present. Teaching the heptapods English, and in turn learning the heptapods' logogram-based language, give Louise visions outside the present. We learn eventually that Louise is seeing her future, but the story is structured as to make us believe that she is seeing her past. In the meantime, she establishes enough of a rapport with heptapods such that she can directly ask them the question for which she was taken into service. What is your purpose? Louise only gets the answer when she crosses the barrier separating her from the heptapods. One of the heptapods looms over her and reveals that they had come to Earth to help humanity unify through language. In a vision of the future, Louise sees herself feted for her central role in this global linguistic unification. She looks over a ballroom full of guests, recalling the opening sequence of the film. Quote, "Now I'm not sure I believe in beginnings and endings." Louise Banks uses more technology than Kate Macer when viewing from above, but in Blade Runner 2049, Villeneuve's characters rely ever more on technology. In particular, Villeneuve follows the arc of Officer K, played by Ryan Gosling. On K's way from Los Angeles to rural California on his flying spinner, Villeneuve showed an expansive field of energy panels, which presumably runs the entire greater Los Angeles area of the year 2049. The panorama is bathed in a somber silvery hue. Then, on K's way from LA to San Diego, Villeneuve showed an expansive landfill. The entire district, in fact, is the landfill. And on K's way from LA to Las Vegas, Villeneuve showed what is left of the city from inside the spinner. Kay uses his vehicle's various visualization equipment during all of his three crossings from LA. Most starkly, he checks for radiation levels as he flies into an orange-coated Las Vegas. The mystery that Kay tries to solve in Blade Runner 2049 relates to the question of whether humans can procreate with bioengineered humans or replicants, of which K is just one variety. Blade Runner 2049 implies that the sexual encounter between the human Deckard and the replicant Rachel in the original Blade Runner produced offspring. K comes to suspect that he is one of these offspring and investigates four technologically mediated views from above where women look over K drove this plot. First, K and his holographic companion, Joe, read DNA records from a device that resembles a microfiche viewer. Second, the replicant Love wears specs that resemble Google Glass and provides an unknowing K with fire support after he lands on the San Diego landfill. Third, Dr. Anna Stellin, a memory designer who is later revealed to be the human-replicant hybrid daughter of Deckard and Rachel, looks into a device that resembles an optometrist's tool to scan K and determine whether a memory from his childhood is real or implanted. Anna tells K that the memories are both real and implanted. K's enraged reaction to this discovery is all too real, so much so that when he reports back to LAPD, his commanding officer, Lieutenant Joshi, detects emotional deviance. At this point, Case goes rogue and heads Las Vegas, where Deckard had exiled himself. Villeneuve ended Blade Runner 2049 by returning to the traditional view from above, showing Kay lying down on the steps of Anna's lab, exhausted but enjoying the snow. He had succeeded in reuniting father and daughter, parting with Deckard with the words, "All the best memories are hers." And so, Kay crossed from his artificial to some form of human existence by being virtual kin to Anna. The geographic and symbolic border crossings that Kate Macer, Louise Banks, and Officer K make in their respective stories into professional exiles evoke the various reflections of artists who have themselves experienced exile. Milosh noted that this despair of exile, which projects in the extreme to Kate's quandary, her moral torment reflects her attachment to a heroic image of herself, and she must step by step come to the painful conclusion that to do morally valid work and to preserve an untarnished image of herself is rarely possible. Brodsky suggested that exile is a linguistic event which projects to Louise's vision of the not present. And finally, Said viewed exiles as eccentrics who feel their difference as a kind of orphanhood, which projects to Kay's nascent desire to become human, or at the very least, have a parent. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.